Pheromones are just biology's way of robbing you of free will. Alphas flex omegas fold, and the rest of us get stuck cleaning up the mess. I'm Leo. A solid, aggressively uninteresting beta. I don't smell like rain-washed forests or spun sugar. I smell like cheap diner coffee and anxiety. So when Dominic, the university's reigning golden boy alpha, pinned me against a locker breathing in my neck, I didn't swoon. I just wondered if he realized I was wearing my roommate's unwashed laundry. Our apartment smelled like an overripe fruit bowl left in the sun. Toby, my roommate, was 3 days out from his heat. As an Omega, this meant his biology was currently staging a hostile takeover of his brain. He had dragged every blanket pillow and loose article of soft clothing from our respective bedrooms into the living room, constructing a sad, lopsided nest beneath the coffee table. He was currently curled inside it, whimpering softly, clutching a throw pillow like it held the secrets to the universe. I stood in the kitchen drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug, watching him. I didn't feel the sudden, overwhelming urge to protect and coddle him that an alpha would. Nor did I feel the sympathetic hormonal spike another Omega might. I just felt tired. And slightly annoyed that he had commandeered my good fleece blanket. "Toby," I said, my voice flat. "I have to go to the lab. Did you take my gray hoodie?" A muffled whine emerged from the pile of bedding. A pale hand breached the surface of the blankets, pointing weakly toward a pile of discarded clothes by the front door. I set my mug down on the cheap laminate counter. The heating in our off-campus building had been broken for 2 days, and it was late November. The air in the apartment was freezing, contrasting sharply with the cloying, heavy scent of Toby's distress, a smell like rotting peaches and burnt honey. It stuck to the back of my throat. I grabbed the nearest heavy sweatshirt from the pile by the door. It was an oversized black zip-up that Toby usually wore when he was feeling pathetic. I didn't care. It was thick and I was cold. I pulled it over my head. It swallowed me a little, the sleeves falling past my knuckles. It absolutely reeked of him, the concentrated, desperate scent of an Omega on the precipice. I wrinkled my nose, zipping it up to my chin. Whatever. The chemistry lab smelled of bleach and formaldehyde. It would strip the scent out of the cotton in an hour. The walk to campus was a blur of gray skies and biting wind. By the time I reached the science building, my nose was numb and my fingers were stiff. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, grateful for the blast of artificial heat, and kept my head down, making a beeline for the stairwell. I didn't see him until I walked right into him. It was like hitting a brick wall wrapped in a tailored pea coat. The impact knocked the breath out of me, and my ratty canvas backpack slipped off my shoulder, hitting the linoleum with a heavy thud. "Christ," I muttered, rubbing my forehead. I bent down to grab the strap. "Careful." The voice was a low rumble. It didn't just vibrate in the air. It seemed to resonate in the floorboards. I grabbed my bag and stood up, finally looking at the obstacle I had just collided with. Dominic. Everyone knew Dominic. He was the kind of alpha that made the university administration look the other way when he missed class. He was on the rowing team his family donated wings to the library, and he had a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. But it wasn't just his looks. It was the atmospheric pressure he carried with him. When alphas like him walked into a room, the air grew heavy. You could feel it in your eardrums. It was a biological dominance that made Omegas lower their eyes, and made betas like me want to quietly exit through the nearest fire escape. Normally, he wouldn't have even glanced at me. I am the human equivalent of beige drywall. But right now, Dominic wasn't moving. He stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, his dark eyes locked on me. His chest rose and fell in a sudden sharp breath. And then I smelled it. The scent of crushed pine needles, ozone, and something sharp and metallic like blood on a rusted knife. It wasn't the ambient controlled scent he usually projected. This was raw. It hit me so hard my eyes actually watered. My beta biology doesn't react to pheromones with desire or submission, but it does recognize a threat. My heart rate spiked, a primitive alarm bell ringing in my skull. "Sorry," I mumbled, taking a step back. I wanted to put distance between us. The air around him was physically oppressive. He didn't say anything. Instead, he took a step forward. He leaned in just a fraction of an inch, his face hovering uncomfortably close to my neck. He inhaled, a deep, ragged sound that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. I froze. panic cold and sharp spiked in my chest. He was smelling Toby's heat. He was smelling the cloying, desperate scent woven into the fabric of the sweatshirt. But Dominic didn't look at the sweatshirt. He looked at me. His eyes, usually a cool, detached brown, were blown wide, the pupils swallowing the irises. You... He started, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He looked completely unmoored, the perfectly composed campus king staring at me like I had just materialized out of thin air. He raised a hand, his knuckles brushing the collar of the hoodie. The contact was electric, not in a romantic way, in a sticking a fork in a toaster way. I flinched violently, slapping his hand away before I could think better of it. Back off! I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. Dominic blinked, the physical rejection seeming to snap him out of whatever pheromone-induced trance he was in. He took a step back, shaking his head slightly like a dog clearing water from its ears. The heavy metallic scent rolling off him dialed back to a dull hum, though the pine remained sharp and confused. He started looking down at his hand, then back to my face. I'm sorry. I didn't... He frowned deeply, staring at me as if trying to solve a complex equation in his head. I didn't wait for him to finish. I gripped my backpack strap tight enough to turn my knuckles white, shoved past him, and power walked down the hall. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a dull, aching rhythm. I ducked into the chemistry prep room, locking the door behind me. I stripped the black sweatshirt off, practically throwing it across the room into a hazardous waste bin. I stood there shivering in my thin t-shirt, surrounded by the comforting, sterile smell of bleach and glass cleaner. It was just a misunderstanding. Just biology making a fool out of someone. By tomorrow he would realize I was just a beta who borrowed a dirty sweater. At least that's what I told myself. The problem with rumors in an ecosystem driven by hormones is that they bypass logic entirely. It took exactly 24 hours for the narrative to crystallize. By the time I sat down in the cafeteria on Thursday with my lukewarm soup, the campus had decided I was a late-blooming Omega, a very rare, very stubborn Omega who was playing a high-stakes game of hard to get with the apex alpha of the school. You realize people are staring at you, right? Nora asked. She stabbed a limp carrot with her plastic fork. Nora was a fellow beta and engineering major who viewed the whole alpha-omega dynamic as a massive, inefficient flaw in human evolution. I'm ignoring it, I said, ripping a piece of stale bread into microscopic pieces. The table of omegas by the window has been glaring at the back of your head for 10 minutes. I think one of them is trying to set you on fire with her mind. Nora pointed her fork at me. And there are 3 alphas at the corner table who look like they want to arm wrestle you for mating rights. Or just smell your neck. Nora, please stop. I closed my eyes, pressing my palms against my eyelids until I saw bursts of static. I'm just saying, Leo, you wore a preheat Omega's unwashed nest hoodie into the path of a chronically stressed, overachieving alpha. You basically walked into a minefield covered in bacon grease. It was cold in the apartment, I muttered defensively. I didn't think. Clearly. She took a bite of her carrot, crunching loudly. So when are you going to tell him what? That you don't have a uterus, Leo. That your scent profile is mildly dusty library book. That he's currently obsessing over a ghost. I opened my eyes and glared at her. I don't have to tell him anything, because he's not obsessing over me. We bumped into each other once. It's over. As if summoned by the sheer hubris of my statement, the ambient noise in the cafeteria shifted. It wasn't a sudden silence. It was a dampening, a collective holding of breath. The barometric pressure dropped. I didn't have to look up to know who had walked in. My skin felt itchy. Oh, look, Nora whispered, highly amused. The ghost hunter is here. I kept my eyes glued to my soup. I focused on a single bead of oil floating on the surface. Just keep walking, I thought at him. Go to the premium athlete food line, buy your protein shake, leave. The sound of heavy boots on the linoleum grew louder. It didn't fade toward the serving counters. It moved steadily toward the center of the room, toward me. The heavy, suffocating smell of pine and black pepper settled over our table like a weighted blanket. It was so intense it made my tongue taste like copper. I finally looked up. Dominic was standing at the end of our small circular table. He wasn't looking at Nora. He was looking at me. Up close, without the immediate panic of our first collision, I could see the bags under his eyes. He looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that comes from constantly holding back an avalanche. His jaw was tight, and his hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his dark jeans. "Leo," he said. My name sounded strange in his mouth. Too heavy. "Can I help you?" I asked. I aimed for a tone of bored indifference, but my voice wavered slightly. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me. It was an invasive, searching look. He was trying to find the scent from yesterday. I knew he was. But today I was just wearing my own clothes washed in unscented detergent. I smelled like nothing. I saw a flicker of confusion cross his face, followed quickly by something else. Frustration, denial. He took a half step closer. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "For yesterday in the hall. I overstepped." The entire cafeteria was listening. I could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. My face flushed hot, a creeping red embarrassment that I couldn't control. "It's fine," I said quickly. "Forget it. I haven't," he murmured. It wasn't a threat. It sounded almost like a confession. He pulled his hands out of his pockets. In his left hand, he held a paper cup from the expensive coffee shop across campus. He set it down on the table right next to my pathetic plastic bowl of soup. "I noticed you were drinking instant yesterday in the hall. This is better." Before I could process the gesture or the fact that he had been paying enough attention to notice what was in my travel mug yesterday, he turned and walked away. He didn't wait for a thank you. He didn't look back. The oppressive weight of his scent lingered for a few moments, then slowly dissipated as he left the cafeteria, the heavy doors swinging shut behind him. Nora reached over and popped the lid off the paper cup. "Black coffee," she said, sniffing it. "2 shots of espresso. No sugar, no milk." She looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "He guessed your exact order, Leo." I stared at the black liquid. My hands were shaking slightly. I was a beta. We were supposed to be the background noise. The steady, reliable, invisible gears that kept the world turning while alphas and omegas burned everything down with their drama. I hated the attention. I hated the feeling of his pheromones pressing against my skin. I hated the rumors. But as I wrapped my cold fingers around the warm paper cup, a pathetic, insidious thought crept into the back of my mind. He saw me. Even if it was a lie, even if it was just biology playing a cruel trick, for the first time in my life, an alpha had crossed a crowded room just to look at me. I picked up the cup and took a sip. It was perfect, and it tasted like a mistake. Friday night at the biology department mixer, I was only here because Toby had begged me. The preheat had finally hit him full force, and he was barricaded in his room weeping over a commercial for dish soap. He needed notes from a classmate, a beta named Sarah, who was notoriously awful at replying to emails but never missed a departmental open bar. The mixer was held in the basement of the student union. It was a terrible venue, low ceilings, bad ventilation, an exposed brick that trapped sound. It smelled of cheap keg beer, stale corn chips, and a volatile cocktail of college student pheromones. I found Sarah got the flash drive with the notes and was currently standing in the darkest corner I could find, waiting for a break in the crowd so I could slip out unnoticed. I felt him before I saw him. It was a physical sensation like the drop in temperature right before a thunderstorm. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The ambient noise of the party seemed to dull, drowned out by a low rhythmic thrumming in my ears. Pine needles, black pepper, and tonight a heavy dark undercurrent of whiskey. I turned my head. Dominic was across the room. He was leaning against a pillar, a plastic cup in his hand, looking profoundly bored as a pretty Omega from the debate team talked animatedly at him. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking straight at me through the dim strobing lights. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He didn't even blink. The intensity of his stare felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I broke the eye contact, staring intensely at a stain on the concrete floor. Leave, my brain screamed. Just walk out the door. I pushed off the wall, sliding through the crowd, keeping my head down. Someone bumped into my shoulder hard. "Watch it," a voice slurred. I stumbled back, looking up. It was an alpha I recognized from one of my organic chemistry lectures. Greg. He was a textbook brute force alpha, wide shoulders, a loud voice, and a scent like stale cologne and burnt rubber. He was heavily intoxicated, his eyes bloodshot and dilated. He looked down at me, his aggression morphing into a sleazy sort of recognition. "Oh, hey, you're that guy, the late bloomer." "Excuse me," I said, trying to step around him. He moved, blocking my path. He leaned in, taking a loud, obnoxious sniff of the air near my neck. I recoiled, disgust curling in my stomach. "You don't smell like anything," Greg muttered, his brow furrowing in drunk confusion. "They said you smelled sweet, like an Omega." "Why don't you smell sweet?" "Because I'm a beta," I said through gritted teeth. "Now let me pass." "Nah, I don't think so." He reached out, his thick fingers closing around my upper arm. His grip was painfully tight. "Dominic's been acting like a guard dog over a bone he hasn't even chewed yet. Let's see what the big deal is." He pulled me toward him. A wave of pure instinctual panic hit me. Beta biology isn't equipped to fight off an aggressive alpha. We lack the muscle mass. The adrenaline spikes, the sheer violence built into their DNA. I dug my heels in, twisting my arm, but he held fast. "Let go of me!" I shouted, the sound swallowed by the heavy bass of the music. Before I could struggle further, the air in the room didn't just shift, it violently snapped. The ambient chatter died instantly. A suffocating, choking pressure slammed into the basement. Several Omegas nearby actually dropped to their knees, gasping. Even Greg froze, his eyes widening in sudden primal terror. A hand, large and pale, clamped down on Greg's shoulder. It was Dominic. I had never seen him like this. The detached, exhausted campus king was gone. In his place was something feral. His lips were pulled back slightly, exposing his teeth. His chest was heaving. The smell of him was overwhelming. It smelled like a forest fire. Blazing heat, suffocating smoke, and pure, unadulterated wrath. "Take your hand off him," Dominic said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a low, guttural snarl that vibrated right through my bones. Greg released me instantly, as if my skin had caught fire. He stumbled backward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Hey man, chill. I was just—" Dominic didn't let him finish. He shoved Greg backward with one hand. It didn't look like he put much effort into it, but the force sent Greg flying. He crashed into a heavy folding table covered in drinks, sending red Solo cups and cheap beer flying everywhere. The room erupted into screams and shouts, but Dominic didn't look at the chaos he'd just caused. He turned to me. His eyes were completely black, the irises swallowed by blown pupils. He was breathing hard, the violent pheromones rolling off him in suffocating waves. He reached out his hand, hovering over my arm, where Greg had grabbed me. He didn't touch me, but I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice thick, rough around the edges. I was trembling, not from desire, but from the massive dump of adrenaline and fear. This was exactly what I hated, this loss of control, this biological theater. "No," I choked out, backing away from him. "No, I'm fine." I didn't wait for his response. I turned and practically ran for the stairs, bursting through the heavy fire doors and out into the freezing night air. I stumbled into the alleyway beside the building, leaning back against the cold, rough brick. I gasped for air, dragging the freezing oxygen into my lungs, trying to flush the smell of burning pine out of my system. I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking violently. The heavy metal door clicked open. I didn't have to look to know it was him. I could feel the heat of him stepping into the alley. The aggressive, violent edge of his scent was receding, replaced by a deep, aching distress. "Leo," he said softly. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Don't." He stopped a few feet away. "I didn't mean to scare you. He was touching you. Instinct." He sounded lost, pathetic even. the great alpha brought low by a crossed wire in his brain. I opened my eyes and looked at him. He stood under the flickering yellow light of a street lamp looking at me with a desperate, hungry confusion. This was it. This was the moment. I had to break the illusion. I had to tell him that whatever he was feeling, whatever primal urge was driving him to protect me, to seek me out, was built on a lie. It was built on Toby's dirty laundry. Dominic, I said, my voice trembling but loud enough in the quiet alley. You need to stop this. You need to leave me alone. He flinched as if I had struck him. I can't. You have to. I snapped, a sudden bitter anger rising in my throat. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are suffocating me. It's my scent, he said quickly, misinterpreting my words. He took a step back physically, trying to rein himself in. I know it's heavy. I can control it. When I saw him grab you, it's not your scent, I yelled. The sound echoed off the brick walls. It's not you, Dominic. It's me. He stared at me, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? I opened my mouth. I had the words ready. I'm a beta. I don't smell like spun sugar in distress. I smell like nothing. You are obsessed with a phantom. But as I looked at him, at the raw, desperate vulnerability in the eyes of a man who usually looked at the world with utter indifference, the words caught in my throat. If I told him the truth, the way he was looking at me right now would vanish. The protection, the intense, unwavering focus. I would go back to being beige drywall. I am a cynical person. I know better than to play with biology, but I am also human. And for the first time, I was holding the leash. I lied, my voice dropping to a whisper. I just need time. Dominic's posture softened instantly. The tension bled out of his shoulders and a look of profound relief washed over his face. He nodded slowly, taking another step back to give me space. Okay, he breathed. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I watched him turn and walk back into the building, leaving me alone in the cold alley. I slumped against the brick, running a trembling hand through my hair. I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. Maintaining a lie is not an abstract concept. It is a physical, exhausting labor. It requires logistics, supply chains, and a sickening amount of calculation. Toby's heat broke on Sunday afternoon. He emerged from his room looking like a hostage who had just been rescued, pale, trembling, and smelling of stale sweat and dried tears. He spent 2 hours in the shower scrubbing the biological distress from his skin. Then he gathered up his nest. The blankets, the pillows, the clothes. He shoved them all into 3 heavy-duty trash bags and dragged them down to the building's laundry room. I watched him do it from the kitchen counter. I watched the physical evidence of my lie disappear into the industrial washing machines. Panic, cold and thin, slid down my throat. When Toby went back upstairs, I walked into his room. The air was still thick with the residual scent of rotting peaches and burnt honey. It made my stomach turn. I felt like a scavenger, a rat picking through garbage. I dug through his laundry hamper, pulling out a gray t-shirt that had escaped the purge. It was damp with his sweat. It reeked. I took it to my room, folded it meticulously, and sealed it inside a large Ziploc bag. I hid the bag at the bottom of my sock drawer. It was the most pathetic thing I had ever done. Monday morning, I opened the plastic bag. The concentrated scent hit me like a physical blow. I rubbed the fabric against the collar of my jacket, against my wrists, against the nape of my neck. I felt dirty. I felt like I was wearing a skin suit made of someone else's vulnerability. But it worked. The shift in the university ecosystem was subtle, but absolute. The whispers in the hallways didn't stop, but they changed frequency. I was no longer an anomaly. I was claimed territory. I walked into my morning seminar, keeping my eyes glued to the floor. The chair next to my usual spot at the back was occupied. Dominic didn't look at me as I sat down. He was staring straight ahead at the whiteboard, a pen twirling lazily between his fingers. He was wearing a heavy gray sweater, the sleeves pushed up to his forearms. The ambient scent of him, pine and crushed black pepper, was tightly controlled. It wasn't the suffocating violent wave from the basement. It was a low, steady hum. A perimeter check. "You look tired," he said quietly. His voice didn't carry past our desk. I didn't sleep well. I lied. I'd slept fine. Betas sleep like rocks. It's the guilt that was keeping me awake, not biology. He stopped twirling the pen. He reached into his messenger bag on the floor and pulled out a small insulated thermos. He set it on the desk between us. Chamomile and honey, he murmured. It's supposed to help with the post-heat drop. I stared at the thermos. It was matte black stainless steel, expensive. He had researched it. He had looked up what an Omega needed after a heat cycle, and he had made it for me. A knot of pure toxic shame tightened in my chest. Thank you, I rasped. I unscrewed the lid. The steam rose smelling of warm flowers and sugar. It was completely at odds with the bitter instant coffee I usually drank. I took a sip. It burned my tongue sweet and soothing. Dominic finally turned his head to look at me. His dark eyes mapped my face, searching for the micro-expressions of an Omega seeking comfort. I forced my shoulders to relax. I forced myself to lean back in my chair, projecting a docility I didn't feel. Is he bothering you? Dominic asked. Greg. No, I said quickly. I haven't seen him. Good. The word was heavy, a promise of violence wrapped in a casual syllable. He reached out his hand, resting flat on the desk, his pinky finger just barely brushing the side of my knuckle. The contact sent a jolt of static electricity up my arm. He was testing the waters. He was courting me. I didn't pull away. I sat there drinking the tea meant for a phantom letting the campus apex alpha tether himself to a lie. It felt sickening, and it felt like a drug. By Thursday, the friction of the deception was wearing me raw. The Ziploc bag in my drawer was losing its potency. I was rationing the scent, dabbing it on only when I knew I would see him. But Dominic was making that difficult. He was everywhere. He didn't hover, he wasn't clumsy about it. He was just a constant gravitational presence. He was at the library when I studied. He was outside the chemistry lab when my shift ended. He didn't always speak. Sometimes he just nodded, falling into step beside me, letting his heavy protective pheromones drape over my shoulders like a thick wool coat. It was raining. A cold, relentless, bone-chilling sleet that turned the campus into a miserable gray wash. I was sitting in the corner of the campus library, hunched over my laptop, trying to finish an essay on cellular decay. The heating system was rattling, fighting a losing battle against the drafts from the old windows. I shivered, pulling my thin jacket tighter around my chest. A shadow fell over my keyboard. I didn't jump. I knew the atmospheric pressure dropped by now. Dominic pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. He didn't have any books. He just rested his forearms on the table, folding his hands together. He looked exhausted. The dark circles under his eyes were bruised and heavy. Being an alpha of his tier required a massive amount of caloric and mental energy just to maintain composure. Dealing with a fledgling Omega who was keeping him at arm's length was visibly draining him. "You're freezing," he said. It wasn't a question. "It's an old building," I muttered, not looking up from my screen. "I'm fine." He stood up. He unzipped his heavy fleece-lined waterproof jacket, shrugging out of it. He walked around the table and draped it over my shoulders. The heat radiating from the lining hit me instantly. It was like stepping in front of a furnace. The jacket smelled violently of him. Deep, resinous pine. The sharp crack of ozone. And underneath it, the clean, masculine scent of whatever soap he used. It was overwhelming. It swallowed me whole. I froze my hands, hovering over the keyboard. "Put your arms through the sleeves," he instructed softly. I obeyed blindly. The jacket was massive on me, the cuffs extending past my fingertips. I felt ridiculous. I felt small. Dominic crouched down beside my chair so his face was level with mine. He was so close I could see the individual lashes framing his dark eyes. I could hear the steady rhythmic intake of his breath. He leaned in just a fraction. He was trying to scent me. He was trying to find the sweet rotting peach smell of Toby's distress beneath the heavy layer of his own pine. I'd been in a rush this morning. I'd barely touched the fabric from the Ziploc to my collar. His brow furrowed. He inhaled again, deeper this time. "You're fading," he whispered, his voice laced with sudden acute anxiety. "Your scent. It's almost gone. Are you sick? Panic, sharp and metallic, tasted like blood in my mouth. No, I stammered, pulling back against the hard wooden back of the chair. I'm not sick. The heat, it's just tapering off. It was a weird cycle. Omegas don't just fade out. Dominic said, his jaw tightening. His eyes darted across my face, cataloging my pale skin, my dilated pupils. He was reading my panic, but he was misinterpreting the source. He thought I was biologically failing. Have you seen the campus Dr. A sudden drop in pheromone production can cause a neurological crash? Let me take you. No, I said too loud. A librarian 2 tables over shushed us violently. I lowered my voice to a desperate hiss. Dominic, stop. I don't need a doctor. I just need to finish this paper. He stared at me. The protective instincts woven into his DNA were battling with his conscious desire to respect the boundary I had drawn in the alleyway. The conflict played out on his face in a series of rigid muscle spasms. Please, I whispered. It was a genuine plea. I couldn't keep doing this. I was drowning in his jacket, drowning in his attention, drowning in my own miserable cowardice. Dominic closed his eyes. He took a long, shuddering breath, locking down the alpha biology that was screaming at him to scoop me up and carry me to a clinic. When he opened his eyes, they were blank, controlled. Okay, he said quietly. He stood up, towering over me once more. Keep the jacket. I'll walk you home when you're done. He walked back to his side of the table and sat down, staring out the rain-streaked window. I looked down at my hands buried in the dark fleece of his sleeves. I was a parasite. I was feeding off the biological imperatives of a man who thought he was protecting a fragile mate. I closed my laptop. The essay didn't matter anymore. Nothing felt real except the heavy, suffocating warmth of the lie wrapped around my shoulders. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday night, exactly 3 weeks after the collision in the hallway. The Ziploc bag was empty. The scent had degraded into nothing but the stale smell of old cotton. Toby had moved on to a new laundry detergent, a harsh synthetic lavender that completely masked his natural baseline scent. I had nothing left to wear. I spent an hour in the bathroom staring at my reflection. I looked exactly like what I was, Leo. A beta with dark circles under his eyes, messy brown hair, and an expression of chronic indigestion. I rubbed unscented lotion into my skin, put on a plain gray sweater, and walked out the door. Dominic had asked me to meet him at a diner off the highway a few miles past the campus boundaries. Neutral territory, he had called it in his text. The diner was a relic from the 90s. Chrome edges, red vinyl booths patched with duct tape, and a smell that was permanently ingrained in the walls, burnt coffee, old fryer oil, and industrial floor wax. It was entirely empty except for a tired waitress reading a paperback behind the counter. Dominic was sitting in a booth by the window. He was watching the headlights of passing semi-trucks cut through the dark. I walked over and slid into the booth across from him. The vinyl squeaked loudly under my weight. He turned his head. He looked stripped down tonight. No tailored pea coat, no heavy sweaters. Just a faded black Henley that stretched tight across his chest. His hair was messy, as if he'd been running his hands through it all day. You made it, he said, a small, genuine smile cracking his usual stoicism. I did. I kept my hands clamped between my knees to stop them from shaking. He didn't immediately try to scent me. The diner was drafty and the smell of the grease was overpowering. It offered a temporary shield. The waitress drifted over, poured us 2 mugs of sludgy, bitter coffee without asking, and drifted away. Dominic wrapped his large hands around his mug, letting the heat soak into his skin. I wanted to get you away from campus, he said quietly. The atmosphere there, it's too thick. Everyone is watching. They are, I agreed, staring into my black coffee. I hate it, he confessed. I looked up surprised. You're the campus king. I thought alphas thrived on that. Dominic laughed. It was a harsh scraping sound. It's a performance, Leo. The rowing team, the library, donations, the posture. My family expects an apex predator. They expect me to graduate mate with an heir from a compatible family and run the firm. He ran a hand down his face, dragging the skin beneath his eyes. It's exhausting. It feels like I'm constantly holding my breath. He was handing me his vulnerabilities. He was showing me his soft underbelly, something alphas rarely did, and never with anyone they didn't deeply trust. He was treating me like a safe harbor. But then I ran into you. He continued, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble. And you didn't care. You pushed me away. You told me to leave you alone. You're the first person in my life who hasn't wanted something from me. I want your attention, I thought. I want to feel like I exist, and I am stealing it from you. The guilt was a physical agony. It felt like swallowing broken glass. Dominic, I started, my voice cracking. You don't understand. I do, he interrupted gently. He reached across the sticky Formica table. I froze as his large calloused hand covered mine. His skin was so hot. I know you're scared. I know late presentation is terrifying. You're trying to figure out how to navigate an ecosystem that suddenly wants to consume you. I'm not going to rush you, Leo. I swear. He was looking at me with such raw, unadulterated affection that I couldn't breathe. Then the draft in the diner shifted. The overhead vent kicked off, killing the airflow. The heavy smell of grease settled toward the floor. The space between us became still. Dominic's thumb was stroking the back of my hand. He leaned forward slightly, instinctively seeking the biological feedback loop that grounded an alpha to their omega. He breathed in. He paused. His thumb stopped moving. He leaned in closer, his nose hovering just inches from the collar of my sweater. He inhaled deeply, a slow, deliberate drag of air. His brow furrowed. The affection in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden sharp confusion. He pulled back slightly, looking down at my hand trapped beneath his, then up to my face. Leo, he said. His voice was different now. The warm rumble was gone. It was flat, clinical. Where is your scent? I took a shower, I blurted out. It was a stupid, desperate lie. I used harsh soap. No soap masks a baseline completely, he said, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't angry yet. He was just processing an anomaly. He let go of my hand and reached up his fingers, brushing the side of my neck right over the scent gland that omegas possessed. I didn't have one. There was nothing there but smooth skin and a rapidly beating pulse. His fingers lingered on the flat, unremarkable surface of my neck. I saw the exact moment the math aligned in his head. I saw the biological confusion shatter, replaced by cold, hard logic. The heavy, comforting scent of pine and pepper in the air didn't flare into anger. It vanished entirely. He locked it down. He withdrew his pheromones so fast it left a vacuum in the booth, leaving me cold and entirely exposed. He slowly pulled his hand back, resting it on the table. He stared at me. His face was a completely blank mask, more terrifying than any snarl or shout. You're a beta, he stated. It wasn't a question. The silence in the diner was absolute. The only sound was the harsh buzzing of the neon sign in the window. I couldn't look at him anymore. I looked at the chipped rim of my coffee mug. Yes, I whispered. Dominic didn't move. He didn't yell. He just sat there staring at the ruins of the architecture I had built. The absence of a thing can be heavier than its presence. When Dominic pulled his scent back, the diner felt cavernous. The oppressive, intoxicating heat that had wrapped around my shoulders for 3 weeks vanished, leaving behind nothing but the draft leaking through the window seals. I was suddenly hyper-aware of my own body. The scratchy wool of my sweater, the dull ache in my lower back from the cheap vinyl booth, the sour taste of burnt coffee coating my tongue. I was just Leo again. Dominic didn't shout. He didn't flip the table or bare his teeth the way he had with Greg in the basement. I almost wished he would. Violence I could understand. Violence was a biological reaction. This, however, was purely human. He looked at me with a profound, hollow exhaustion. The mask of the apex alpha had cracked, and beneath it was just a 21-year-old guy who had been tricked into giving his safest, softest parts to a stranger. How? He asked. His voice was a rasp stripped of its usual resonance. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It felt like swallowing sandpaper. My roommate, Toby, he's an Omega. He went into heat. I borrowed his sweatshirt the day we bumped into each other. I didn't know it smelled like him. I didn't think. Dominic's eyes tracked my movements, his gaze analytical and completely devoid of warmth. And the rest of the time in the library, the chemistry building, I kept a piece of his laundry in a plastic bag. I confessed. The words tasted like bile. Saying it out loud in this harsh fluorescent light made it sound exactly as pathetic and unhinged as it was. I rubbed it on my clothes to keep the scent. A muscle twitched in Dominic's jaw. He looked away from me, staring out the window at the dark highway. A semi-truck roared past, shaking the glass in its frame, but Dominic didn't blink. Why, it was a single syllable, but it carried the weight of a physical blow. Because you made me feel like I existed. Because the biology was fake, but the coffee, the jacket, the way you looked at me, that felt real. Because I am selfish and invisible, and for 3 weeks I was the center of gravity. I couldn't say any of that. It sounded like an excuse. It sounded like I was asking for pity, and I didn't deserve any. I don't know, I lied softly. Dominic slowly turned his head back to me. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. It wasn't the betrayal of an alpha who had been denied a mate. It was the betrayal of a person who had offered a lifeline and had his hand slapped away. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't demand an apology. He just slid out of the booth. The vinyl squeaked a loud, obnoxious sound that cut through the quiet diner. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $10 bill, and dropped it on the sticky Formica table. It landed right next to my half-empty mug. "Keep away from me, Leo," he said. The words were flat dead. He turned and walked toward the exit. He didn't look back. The bell above the door jingled a cheerful mocking tune as he pushed out into the freezing night. The door swung shut, cutting off the sound of the wind. I sat there for a long time. The waitress eventually came over, took the $10 bill, and wiped down Dominic's side of the table with a gray rag that smelled faintly of mildew. She didn't say a word to me. I walked back to campus. It was 3 miles in the dark, the wind biting through my thin jacket. I didn't feel the cold. I felt numb. The lie was over. The architecture had collapsed, and I was exactly where I belonged alone, freezing and entirely unremarkable. The university ecosystem corrected itself with brutal efficiency. By Monday, the rumors had mutated. I wasn't a late-blooming Omega playing hard to get. I was a desperate psychotic beta who had rubbed Omega sweat on himself to trick the campus king. The awe and jealousy that had followed me through the halls morphed instantly into disgust and mockery. Omegas sneered openly as I walked past. Betas avoided my gaze, embarrassed by association. Alphas looked at me with a mixture of contempt and threatening aggression, their protective instincts offended by the sheer audacity of my deception. "You look like a corpse," Nora noted over lunch on Wednesday. She wasn't wrong. I hadn't slept more than a few hours a night since the diner. The dark circles under my eyes looked like bruises. My skin had taken on a grayish pallor. I was drinking my instant coffee black, the bitter taste grounding me in my miserable reality. "Thanks," I muttered, breaking a plastic spoon in half just to feel something snap. "I'm not going to say I told you so," Nora said, leaning her elbows on the table, "because I think the universe is currently saying it loudly enough for the both of us. But Leo, you have to eat something. You're physically decaying." "I'm fine. It's just baseline reality. I'm adjusting." "You're punishing yourself?" she corrected sharply. "You did an incredibly stupid, selfish thing, but you didn't kill anyone. You have to stop walking around like you're waiting for the executioner." I looked out the cafeteria window. The sky was the color of a bruised knee, heavy with impending snow. "He looks worse," I said quietly. I'd seen Dominic exactly twice since the diner, both times from a distance. He had completely retreated into his alpha persona. The soft edges he had started to show me, the messy hair, the worn Henleys, the quiet exhaustion were gone. He wore crisp, tailored coats. His jaw was permanently locked. He moved through the crowds with a terrifying, icy precision, his pheromones dialed back so far it was like a black hole absorbing light rather than emitting it. He looked untouchable, and he looked completely deeply alone. Of course he looks worse. Nora sighed, running a hand over her short hair. You didn't just trick his biology, Leo. You tricked his head. Guys like him, they have so much pressure on them to be the anchor for everyone else. He thought he found someone who didn't need him to be the apex predator, and then he found out it was a con. That's a mindfuck. Her words twisted the knife in my gut. I threw the broken halves of the plastic spoon onto my tray and stood up. The cafeteria was too loud. The smell of frying meat and hormonal teenagers was making me nauseous. I have to go to the lab, I said abruptly. I spent the next 3 weeks living like a ghost. I went to class. I went to the lab. I went to my apartment. Toby tried to comfort me entirely unaware that his biology was the catalyst for my ruin. He offered me cups of tea and heavy blankets, which I politely declined, the smell of his natural lavender detergent turning my stomach. I missed the pine. I missed the black pepper. I missed the suffocating weight of being noticed. It was a pathetic gnawing ache that settled into the marrow of my bones. I had thought being invisible was my natural state, but once you've felt the heat of a spotlight, the dark feels exponentially colder. I was walking back from the library on a Thursday night in late December. The campus was emptying out for the winter holidays. The snow was falling thick and fast, muffling the sound of my boots on the pavement. The streetlights cast long yellow shadows across the fresh powder. I turned the corner toward my apartment building, keeping my head down against the biting wind. And there he was. Dominic was leaning against the brick wall near the entrance of my building. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a dark, heavy sweater. Snow was accumulating on his broad shoulders and in his dark hair. He was staring at the ground, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. My heart stalled in my chest. A primitive spike of adrenaline shot through my veins. I stopped walking. I stood 10 feet away from him, the snow swirling between us. The air didn't shift. There was no barometric pressure drop, no heavy scent of pine rolling over the snowdrifts. He had his pheromones clamped down so tight he might as well have been a beta. He looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. The dark circles beneath them matched my own. He didn't look angry. He looked broken. "You owe me a conversation," he said. His voice was rough, scraping against the cold air. I gripped the strap of my backpack, my knuckles aching. "Dominic, you shouldn't be here. You'll freeze." "I don't care." He pushed off the brick wall, taking a slow step toward me. The snow crunched loudly under his boots. "I've spent 3 weeks trying to convince my brain that you don't exist, that it was just a chemical misfire, a hallucination caused by someone else's sweat." "That's exactly what it was," I said, my voice trembling. "It was a trick. The biology was a trick." He agreed, stopping a few feet away from me. He was close enough now that I could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of his throat. "When I smelled the heat on you in the hallway, that was instinct. When I shoved Greg in the basement, that was adrenaline and territorial programming." He paused, a ragged breath escaping his lips, forming a white cloud in the freezing air. "But the diner wasn't—" He continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The library wasn't. Giving you my jacket, buying you coffee, sitting across from you and feeling quiet. For the first time in years. That wasn't pheromones, Leo. Omegas don't make me feel quiet. They make me feel responsible. They make me feel like a guard dog." He took one more step. He was right in front of me now. I had to tilt my head back to look into his eyes. "So tell me," he demanded, a raw, desperate crack in his stoic facade. "When you sat there wearing my clothes, drinking the tea I made you, was any of that real? Or were you just laughing at the stupid alpha the whole time?" The accusation cut through the numbness that had encased me for weeks. It felt like being plunged into boiling water. "I wasn't laughing at you." I snapped the words tearing out of my throat before I could stop them. "Do you think this was fun for me? Do you think I enjoyed sneaking around with dirty laundry like a parasite?" "Then why did you do it?" he shouted back, the sudden volume making me flinch. "'Cause you looked at me." I screamed, the sound echoing off the empty apartment buildings. The cynical detached beta. I tried to be shattered completely. I was shaking, hot tears pricking the corners of my eyes, freezing almost instantly against my skin. Because I have spent my entire life being the background noise, I am beige drywall Dominic. I am the guy who cleans the lab equipment and takes notes and watches everyone else live these massive chemically driven lives. I took a shaky breath, stepping back, wrapping my arms around my chest. And then you ran into me. And you looked at me like I was the only thing in the hallway. Even if it was a lie, even if it was just Toby's scent. You saw me. You sat with me. You talked to me like I was a person, not just a biological obligation. I kept doing it because I'm weak. And because for 3 weeks I actually felt like I mattered. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the wind howling through the alleyway and the harsh, ragged sound of my own breathing. I stared at the snow-covered pavement, waiting for him to turn around and leave, waiting for the final disgusted rejection. Instead, I heard the heavy crunch of boots stepping closer. Dominic didn't release his scent. He didn't try to drown me in pine and pepper. He reached out with bare, freezing hands and gently gripped my shoulders. "Look at me," he commanded softly. I slowly raised my head. He was looking at me, not with blown feral pupils, not with the frantic possessive haze of an alpha in the grip of instinct. He was looking at me with clear, tired, entirely human eyes. "I see you," he said. The words were quiet, but they resonated in my chest. No pheromones, no heat, just you. He slid his hands down my arms, his thumbs brushing against the rigid line of my tense muscles. "It's quiet again, Leo." I let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "You're insane. I humiliated you. I lied to you for weeks." "You did?" He agreed, a faint wry smile touching the corners of his mouth. "You're a liar. You're cynical. You smell like cheap instant coffee and anxiety." "I really do," I whispered. I hate instant coffee." He noted his hands moving to cup my freezing face. His palms were rough, calloused from rowing and wonderfully perfectly warm. "I'm going to have to buy you the good stuff, for a long time, to make up for the fact that my biology is an idiot." "Your biology didn't make me steal a sweater," I pointed out, leaning a fraction of an inch into the warmth of his hands. "We're both idiots," Dominic conceded. He didn't kiss me. He didn't claim me. This wasn't a biological fairy tale where the alpha bites the omega and the world resolves into perfect clarity. This was a parking lot in the freezing snow. We were two exhausted, flawed people who had collided through a lie and found something awkwardly genuine in the wreckage. Dominic let go of my face, stepping back slightly, though he kept his presence close. "Are you going to go inside, or are we going to stand out here until we get frostbite?" I looked at my apartment building. I thought about the drafty living room, the smell of synthetic lavender, the empty, quiet beige walls of my bedroom. Then I looked back at Dominic, the apex alpha who was standing in a blizzard without a coat, just to prove he could see me without a biological filter. "I know a diner," I said, my voice finally steady. "It's off the highway. It smells like burnt oil and terrible decisions." Dominic's smile reached his eyes this time. It was a beautiful, entirely human expression. "Lead the way." We walked back toward the campus edge side by side. There was no heavy atmospheric pressure, no suffocating pheromones dictating my pulse. There was just the quiet crunch of snow, the biting winter wind, and the solid, undeniable reality of the man walking next to me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was wearing a disguise. I smelled like nothing at all, and it was exactly enough. If you love this story of raw, imperfect connection and the struggle against biological destiny, hit that like button. Right now, it really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more grounded emotional storytelling. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who crave a fresh twist on the Omegaverse, and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a new audio drama. Drop a comment below. Who do you think was more at fault, Leo or Dominic? Let's discuss. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.